Let's talk about school. The traditional system most of us grew up in. Is it really the best way to get kids ready for the world we live in now and the world of tomorrow? It's a massive question, and honestly, there's a lot riding on the answer. Okay, let's dive in and see where the cracks are really starting to show.
It really all begins right here with the human side of things. That's a quote from Lacey, who used to be a public school teacher. Just let that sink in for a second. We're talking about 7 and 8-year-olds who are already feeling crushed by anxiety over their performance. This isn't just some abstract policy debate. It's about what kids are feeling right now in the classroom.
And look, this isn't a new issue. A report from UNESCO points out that the very blueprint for our schools, the classrooms, the bell schedules, how we divide up subjects, it's all an heirloom from the industrial age. It was built for a totally different time, for totally different needs. So the big question is, does that old design still work for us today? Which brings us to our first section. We're going to look at why this inherited model, this kind of rigid box, just doesn't seem to fit anymore for so many teachers and students. So I want to tell you about two teachers from Texas, Taylor and Lacey. They were absolutely passionate about what they did, but they felt completely trapped. The whole system was becoming more and more about high-stakes testing, about regimentation. They literally watched the joy of learning get squeezed out and replaced by this constant pressure to perform. They were pouring their hearts and souls into a system that just couldn't use their talents, and they saw how this one-size-fits-all idea was failing everyone. So what do you do? What do you do when the very thing that made you love your job is being suffocated by this system itself? Well, for Taylor and Lacey, they hit a breaking point. The answer became crystal clear. It was time to do something different. If the box didn't fit, well, they were going to build their own. And their story, it's not a one-off. It's a sign of a much bigger pressure that kids are feeling all over. Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit on the students themselves. Let's talk about the real, tangible consequences of this high-pressure world. What's the actual cost of focusing so much on grades and achievement? This slide really lays it out. It's night and day. On one side, you have research that shows when you only focus on grades, it can seriously harm mental health. And here's the kicker. It can actually lead to fragile, underachieving adults. But then, look at the other side. When you shift the focus to emotional support, something incredible happens. Stress goes down, resilience goes up, motivation skyrockets. Why? Because kids feel valued for who they are, not just for what they produce on a test. I absolutely love this quote because it just flips the whole script. What if the kids who are struggling in a traditional school aren't actually failing? What if they're just wired for self-control and naturally push back against being controlled by others? It suggests the problem isn't the student. The problem is the environment doesn't fit their natural drive for autonomy. So, if the traditional, super-controlled model is showing all these cracks, what's the alternative? Let's jump into our next section and explore a completely different philosophy, one that kind of unleashes learning from its usual chains. At the heart of this whole alternative approach is something called self-directed learning. Now, that might sound a little academic, but this definition from Malcolm Knowles breaks it down perfectly. It's basically a process where the learner is in the driver's seat. They are the ones taking the initiative to figure out what they need to learn, how they're going to learn it, and how they'll know they've actually got it. It's all about empowering students to own their own education. And here's where you can really see the massive philosophical shift. We're moving away from that old teacher-centric model with its standardized curriculum and passive learning, where the teacher is basically a director. Instead, we move to a learner-centric model. Here, learning is active, it's hands-on, it's driven by what the student is actually interested in. And the teacher's role? It completely transforms. They're not a director anymore. They're a facilitator, a guide, helping kids learn how to learn. Okay, this all sounds great in theory, right? But what does it actually look like when the rubber meets the road? Let's take a look at a pretty radical, real-world example that's been putting these ideas into practice for over 50 years, the Sudbury Valley School. The very first thing you need to understand about Sudbury Valley is the vibe, the environment itself. It is designed to feel more like a home than an institution. The whole space, with its comfy couches, easy chairs, books everywhere, it sends a clear message. The goal is to make learning feel natural, comfortable, and just part of daily life, not something that's locked away in a rigid classroom. So you're probably thinking, a school with no top-down rules, how does that not just turn into total chaos? Well, it functions through pure democracy. And the key thing here is that everybody gets a voice. All the rules, from how the budget is spent to what happens when someone breaks a rule, are decided at a school meeting. Every single student and staff member gets one vote. And when there's a problem, a judicial committee made up of students and staff handles it. It's not chaos, not at all. It's a real functioning democracy. And this is the question everybody always asks. It's a really cool idea, but does this much freedom actually prepare students for the real world? For college? For a career? Let's just put it out there, plain and simple. With no required classes, no grades, no traditional transcripts, can these kids actually compete and succeed once they graduate? Well, the data is pretty stunning. A long-term study found that Sudbury Valley graduates don't just survive, they thrive. In one group they studied, a whopping 86% of the grads who applied got into one of the most selective colleges in the US. And they did this without grades or transcripts. They got in based on their test scores, interviews, and just being really interesting, capable people. And what about after college? What kind of jobs do they get? As you can see, the outcomes are all over the map, in the best way possible. They've become social workers, nurses, symphony musicians, founders of software companies, artists, skilled mechanics. This model doesn't just produce one type of successful person. It seems to give them the tools to forge their own path, whatever that may be. And this right here is maybe the most powerful finding of all. The graduates didn't just feel like they were prepared for college. They felt they had an advantage. And why? Because for years, they'd been practicing how to be responsible for their own time, how to motivate themselves, how to truly take charge of their own learning. They had already mastered the skills their peers from traditional schools were just starting to figure out. So what's the big takeaway here? From that small school started by two frustrated teachers in Texas, all the way to this 50-year democratic experiment, the evidence is all pointing in the same direction. It's telling us we might need to think about a pretty fundamental shift in how we even approach learning. This quote from UNESCO just perfectly sums up what the goal should be. Education shouldn't just be about cramming our heads full of facts. It should be about connection, about discovery, about opening our eyes to brand new possibilities for ourselves and for the world. And that brings us to our final thought. The big question I want to leave you with, knowing everything we know now about how our brains learn, about what the modern world demands, about our deep human need for purpose and control over our own lives, if we could wipe the slate clean and build an education system from scratch, right now, what would it look like? What would we keep? And what is long, long overdue for a change?